All right. That was my fault, being on two screens at once. So my name's Maria Bloyer. Welcome to another edition of AJE's Special Education Thursday, happening on a Monday, but you might as well be a little different when you can be. Tonight, we're going to be chatting with two folks about exploring private school options here in the district. We're incredibly lucky to have Kevin Mills and Margaret Kenney from the Archdiocese here, and Kevin is from Serving Our Children, which manages the DC Opportunity Scholarship. I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation around, what options might be available to families of students with disabilities who are interested in a private school education. So, Kevin, I know you're listed first, but I'm going to let Margaret go first because, ladies first, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Margaret Kenney White speaking. I'm the manager for special education in our Catholic schools office within the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. And I'm very excited to be here with all of you tonight. And my computer just gave me a message that it's rebooting, so I may have to hop back on, but I'm happy to be here with you all.
Kevin?
Good evening, everyone. Kevin Mills with Serving Our Children. We are the administrator of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, where DC residents can apply for a K-12 scholarship to attend a DC private school. We have been in existence for almost 20 years now, and I have been with the program for 5 years.
Thank you both so much. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to have today's conversation is to kind of explore some of the misconceptions that I see when I talk to families around the availability of private school education for students with disabilities. And also, just because I recognize that that is a phone call that we get a fair amount here at AJE. We do have a lot of families talking to us about what options might be available to them outside of the public school sector. And that includes homeschooling and other options. So I wanted to kind of create a space where folks can tell us a little bit about what they see and how they interact with students with disabilities. I don't know which one of you wants to take this first, but I think a nice place to start is a common misconception.
Well, I think from where I sit, as we try to get as many people in our program as possible, one misconception is that none of the schools can support students with disabilities. A lot of our schools will absolutely accept students that have disabilities, as long as they are given the opportunity to do some type of evaluation and determine if they can support that student. So critical for parents to do their due diligence in terms of reaching out to schools, letting the schools know what the disability is, and allowing the school to give a transparent, honest response about where they can assist the student or where they may not be able to assist the student.
Margaret, I feel like you have something to add to that because I think we talked about something very similar around that.
That was very, very well stated. I know one of the common misconceptions that, we've found is that, that there's a couple, and one that sticks out is that, a student with, a certain disability, like, for example, ADHD might not be a good fit here. And in reality, every student is so different. And that's why our schools really appreciate that transparency of what might be going on with the students so that the school can really partner with the family to help address their needs. And I think another misconception that, I've encountered is that, schools or teachers might judge a family or a student. And really the staff members that I've worked with really have made it clear that they really care about the student and they just want to provide the student with what they need, what the student needs.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. and it's important that if you can get your student evaluated professionally, so you have the proper information to share with the school when you arrive.
And this is a place where I always like to remind families that even though a student is, let's say, enrolled in a private school right now, DC government still has an obligation to evaluate those students if they may have a disability. One conversation I have with families a lot is around, maybe they're enrolled in a private school and they think there's maybe a learning issue or a reading concern, let's say, and they think the student might have dyslexia. And they are concerned that the only way that student is going to be able to get any kind of services or any kind of evaluation is to leave their private school and enroll in a public school. And that's not the case. There is an entire office in the district dedicated to evaluating students with suspected disabilities who attend school in the district but don't go to public schools. And that includes homeschooled students. And that's the central IEP team. And there's a process by which private schools can refer students to that program if they have concerns. Margaret, do you want to talk a little bit about that referral process from your point of view?
Yes, so that is an excellent point too. We actually have several students in a couple different school buildings in our system in DC that actually get some of their services from the District of Columbia, and they have gone through that referral process. And we have found that it's most successful when the parents and the school teams partner together during that referral process, because the teachers who really have gotten to know the students can really paint a picture for that team at the county level to really help identify, what those concerns might be and what information we are looking to get out of an evaluation. And so we do have some families who have gone through that process. And, the interesting piece to that is that when you bring an educator that really knows your child to the table, they can really partner with you to communicate with that team.
I'm also aware, and Margaret, you can, help me through this little process. A number of private schools actually use Title I resources and other title resources at the private school. You just have to ask those administrators what services they are offering. So if it's a reading challenge or something like that, a lot of times they can get help brought in through the city services to help that student be more successful.
Yes, there are some grant options through federal funding that also are available for specific students in the building. In addition to that, I know that our schools are also very flexible, and we also have some families that have a specialist that really has a rapport with that student, and that parent has built that rapport up with that specialist from the outside. And some of our schools have said, well, if your specialist can come in during the day and do a session during the day, that could be a feasible option. And that's a communication between the school team and the parent, but that's another way that a student can get their services.
Absolutely.
All the lawyers in the world just love to hear phrases like, federal programs, federal funds, Title I. And I think I'm not going to do a whole conversation about that, but I do just want to flag for families that, there are laws that do apply to the private school sector, and one of them is the Rehabilitation Act. And the Rehabilitation Act, in a nutshell, says, otherwise qualified students should be able to access programs that receive federal support. And I think that, that's very different than IDEA, which is what a lot of our families are familiar with. But it still applies. And I think, what Ken and Kevin and Margaret were just saying is a great example of how that looks like in real life, right? Not theoretical Maria lawyer talking, but how it shows up. Right? It's a conversation. It's a plan. It's based on what's actually available. And then just to elaborate, because I did say IEPs, there is, students with disabilities who in the district who go through the CIEP process don't get an IEP at the end of that process. They receive, if they accept it, they receive what's called an individualized service plan, and that provides what's called equitable services, which are a little bit different. It's not a full IEP. It's a piece. It's an equitable services. Margaret, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, I just want to add to parents can, if you're living in DC and you're attending a private school in the DC area, the parent really can ask for what's called a draft comprehensive IEP. And that is so helpful to have, because that's a tool that you can take back to the school team in which your child is enrolled and kind of have a guide to look at. And it really can give some ideas to the school team that is teaching your child day in and day out what kind of supports the student might need.
Right. We also call that an offer of faith. I think some people might have heard me say that same, but it's the exact same thing. It's the offer of faith. It's the, this is what we think is appropriate from the school side. That's enormously helpful. So what into where, we've kind of talked a little bit already about where parents can go to learn more. We've talked a little bit about the CIEP team. But I think there's probably more resources out there that folks want to hear about. Does anyone have a particular favorite resource in this space, or something that you wish families had access to earlier as they start to think about these things?
I can't speak a lot to that. I know that the city offers a lot of services, or attempts to offer services to this community. Our schools try to be very transparent about what they can and cannot do. So my suggestion would be always to be sure to, whatever school you're interested in, to really dig in deep when you're talking about a student with disabilities and what support services they have for them.
Perfect. Margaret, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. I think what Kevin said is brilliant. I think one of the things that really, I think, could support parents is just knowing that it's okay to ask questions during an evaluation process. It's okay to ask questions when working with, a private company, but also when working with the local education agency, with the county, at that individualized education plan meeting, because sometimes you don't get the answer unless you ask the question. And I found that to be extremely helpful, to ask those questions at the table, because it is supposed to be a team decision, and you are, as a parent, are a part of that team.
And I'll add a little more. I know a lot of parents think it's a stigma to get your child evaluated and have them diagnosed, because you want them to, quote unquote, be normal. Your students are normal regardless of their disability. They're normal. They just need some more. They need support in certain areas, and it's critical to get them evaluated. Talk to the schools about the resources that you're interested in, because if you don't do that, the problem becomes, one, the school gets surprised by the challenge, and then you will have to more than likely move your student to a new space, which will be disruptive to the education of that student. So really get out there, find the resources, have your students evaluated if you think there's a concern. Talk to those schools and make sure they can support your kid before you put them there. That is so helpful in this process, and most critical to your student.
And Kevin, just to piggyback off of that, one thing that I've encountered a couple times is parents that think that having a disability is a problem that might need to be fixed. And the way that our educators really are looking at it is our students really need strategies in their toolbox, and their strategies in their toolbox might look differently than the student sitting next to them at the table. And so we really want to help parents understand that we want to build strategies and support to help your student make forward progress.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is good because Kevin made it so I didn't have to ask what is a difficult question sometimes, which is, when does it not work, right? When are the times when it's like, oh, this might not be the best idea. And I think in my experience, one time is when the student has, often significant needs that can't be met in something close to a general education classroom or a resource room. Another time I've seen it not work so well is when, families, for whatever reason, and often, legitimate fears, didn't disclose information. Not because they were trying to set somebody up or anything bad like that, but because maybe they thought their child wouldn't be able to attend if they did disclose. Those are the times when I've seen the fit not happen. Are there other kind of times when you've seen it not work out so well?
It's those times, and primarily when parents don't want to just be forthcoming about the student, because it really creates a distraction in the classroom. And if the educators don't know why that is happening or haven't put any services in place, then the student now has become sometimes labeled as problem child. And so they're not, and their issue is not addressed. So it is so important that the school understands where your student is if they're going to be in that school and in that environment.
And to piggyback off of what Kevin is saying there too, and I know this was already mentioned earlier, but that transparency piece that the schools really want to have about what they can provide is so critical. And I don't know any schools that, really want to take, tuition money and not provide for a child. I mean, that's not something that, that's not part of our mission. We want to make sure that we can support the students that are in our schools, and it might be creative changing to what might already be in place. And I think the other point that I have really seen is when talking about student safety, because really ultimately that student is really, that student's well-being is the primary goal. And, we want to make sure that our students are also being safe, and that their needs are being met.
And a lot of our schools, and if anybody wants to visit our website, it's servingourchildrendc.org. We have a list of schools that participate in our program, nearly 40 schools, and they're they have all shapes and sizes. From the very elite schools that you read about to some schools that really have different ways to address learning for students who don't fit into what we call the mold, right? So they've created these spaces for those students who may not learn sitting up straight in a classroom, who may not learn, in the traditional sense of how we go to school. So take the time, if you're interested in any of our schools, to visit as many schools as possible so that you can see what options are out there for you, for a student who may have some disabilities, and how those schools can support them.
And just to piggyback off of that, Kevin, one more thing that I thought of too was we've had some situations where, one of the schools might not be the best fit, but there's been another private school in the area that really has been the best fit. So I know it can be kind of hopeless if something might not be working out the first, week or the first moment, but know that there might be other options out there as well that could really be really great fits for you and your family.
Absolutely. If you go to one school and that's not the fit, I would promise if you ask that school leader, well, what other school do you think might be a fit? They would be able to give you some alternatives. So make sure you're asking all those questions. It can be frustrating if a school says, oh, well, we don't think we can support your student. I think it's still important to just dig in and just say, hey, so I understand it's not a fit here, but if you're aware of another facility that can help, please let us know. And most of them would be able to tell you which schools are set up to meet the needs of a student with disabilities.
I think there's just two things I wanted to highlight from what you said. One is that the digging in comment, which I just think is so important. It takes a lot of research and conversation to find the right school, and that's true no matter how or what kind of school you're trying to access, right? Whether or not you're navigating the lottery or navigating the private space.
Right.
It's a lot of questions and a lot of conversations. And then I want people to realize that there isn't, one specific disability category that's excluded. I often remind folks that, Paul VI High School has an excellent program for students with intellectual disabilities. And people forget about that sometimes. So I don't want folks to just automatically assume, because their child has a certain need that, the private sector is completely off the table. Some schools might not be a good fit at all, but there may be a school out there that is. And I just want that to be on people's radar. And timelines, it does take a long time. I'm not going to ask Kevin to go through his entire timeline for the process, but I know that there is a very different application process in the private sector, and it doesn't align terribly well with the DC lottery. In fact, it doesn't align really at all with the DC school lottery. The test dates are different, the application deadlines are different. When should families start thinking about this if this is something that they want to explore?
So that was top of mind when you were talking. It's important that you are a year early looking for your school. So if you wanted your student to go to a private school in 24, 25, today is the day to start your process. For the scholarship, our process is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. It's online at our website. It takes about 30 minutes if you're pretty savvy with a computer to get through the actual application. Then you got to provide supporting information to prove that you're a DC resident and that your income meets the guidelines. But we keep the application open from now. It actually opened today for 24-25. And we keep it open from now until next spring. So we March and April kind of a timeline for getting your application and all your documents in to get awarded. But I encourage you to use that same timeline to look for your school and find a good fit. Our program actually will refund you up to 5 application fees for any of our participating schools that you apply to. So we really encourage you to look, do your due diligence and look for the right fit and get your student where they can have the most success. So 1 year ahead of schedule is where I think you should be when you were looking for a good private school, and do it in tandem with our application if you're looking for some scholarship funding.
Margaret, did you want to add anything to that timeline for folks to be thinking about?
Similarly, the more advanced notice, the better. I do know that some of our schools actually do accept applicants, throughout the school year, and others have, tighter deadlines, particularly if the class level is full for that year. So it doesn't hurt to ask. And another piece that I thought of when you were talking was that, our parishes, some of them do offer financial assistance to folks as well, and there is a deadline for that. I don't know off the top of my head what the date is for that, but I know there is a deadline for that piece as well.
Well, I'll tell you that some of these schools, the deadlines are as early as late December and early January. And they close those applications early because they have to make determinations about their funding and what they can offer. Our program offers a scholarship, but it doesn't always cover the tuition. So if the student is accepted, gets into the school, and the tuition is higher than we provide, it's important that you are on their list of a family that needs financial help from the school as well. And most of our schools are willing to support families who meet their academic guidelines, or make sure that they're accepted, and they'll give you some financial aid on top of our scholarship. So it's important to get started very, very early, like today, and start figuring out which school and which schools have funding, and make sure you qualify for our program to support them.
Thank you. So Margaret, I'm going to let you have the very last word. If there's something you wanted to add.
No, I think that sums it up well. I will say this, and I don't know if this is true for all the private schools, but in our system, sometimes, there might not be a space for pre-K, but there is for kindergarten that next year, or there might not be, I know some schools have 1 kindergarten this year, but 2 first grades next year. And so it doesn't hurt to also ask, is this something we can revisit again if you really do find that a school might be a really good potential fit?
That's a great point. Thank you for that. Just to let folks know, I am going to pause the recording here in a moment so people can ask questions, and I'll be putting in the comments when we post this links to helpful resources, both from us and from Serving Our Children, and then anything else that Margaret wants to share, kind of helping families navigate. And I'll include also in there the link to the DCPS CIEP office, the Child Find office. So with that, I'm going to pause our recording. And then I do have a couple of questions for y'all, but I want to wait until we are off the recording. Which means I have to hear the screen.